Welcome to the International Bremen Film Conference, this year for the first time in its history in a digital format. My name is Angela Rabing. The conference's theme is Mindscreen, and over the next few days we will be looking at the relationship between mental illness and film. My colleague Tobias Dietrich has been working on this topic for several years. He has organized several film screenings and discussions on the subject at our partner cinema, City 46. And he's writing his dissertation on the aesthetic dimension of mental illness. Together with Winfried Pauleit and me, Tobias will now give us a short introduction to the topic.
Mindscreen, mental illness and film. There is a tension between the two, between illness on the one hand and film on the other. As film and media scholars, we and I are concerned with how to describe the procedures and characteristics of film that enables cinematic experience of mental illness. We take exemplary films to examine this, but also consider historical and media contexts. Films also reveal how social and medical mechanisms of difference, of othering, take shape in everyday experience and in their social and cultural structures. The German film and media scholar James Wolfe distinguished between different conceptions of mental illness in his dissertation as early as 1985. Conceptions, both from popular culture and human science, are legitimate and coexistent. However, they should not be considered identical. Wolfe's discourse analysis is an inventory of film history on the particular subject. It ranges from silent films such as Caligari to the beginning of his research in the early 1980s. At the time, the opening of psychiatric wards was taking place throughout Europe. Incidentally, the history of psychiatry in Bremen played an essential role in this. It was the Blankenburg Monastery near Bremen that was the first German psychiatric institution to be opened.
Psychiatry was criticized as a repressive system. Michel Foucault stimulated a broad social discussion with his publication on madness and civilization. This was also reflected in popular culture. Jack Nicholson and his role in Milos Forman's One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest in 1975 became a popular icon of this critique. Already in 1967, Frederick Wiseman made life inside the asylum accessible to a public audience with his documentary Titicut Follies.
What is illness is currently defined by the ICD-10. The abbreviation stands for International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems. This and its North American equivalent, the DSM-5, form the basis of Western medicine. The classification systems are continually tested and reviewed. An example of revision and reassessment of these systems is provided by Esther Fischer-Homburger, for example. She traced the medical history of depression and so-called affective disorders. As she shows, the scientific attempts to define depression sometimes even contradicted each other. The medical history view, hence, helps us to understand one thing. Medicine has not come to the end of a linear development. The way we talk about health and illness today rather is shaped by a long history, a history that can be questioned and changed. The knowledge of such classification systems should therefore be reflected in the constant historical and cultural change.
We also find the historical and cultural changes in many films. They articulate social crises and make them visible in their characters' diseases. Around 1989, for example, there were two European films about the fall of communism. In The Aesthenic Syndrome by Ukrainian director Kira Muratova, where the powerlessness in light of the collapse of the Soviet Union is transferred to the character's eponymous painting. In Italy, with Nanni Moretti's Paloma Bella Rossa, Red Wooden Pigeon, about the chairman of the Communist Party, a water polo player with amnesia. The term sinking is to be taken literally here, in the water, in the political landscape, in the sphere of forgetting.
Illness is therefore not only a medical category. Illness has social, economic, legal, and political implications. There is also an everyday dimension, and this is what our conference will address. The presentations will focus on the cultural and the aesthetic side of ill-being. All the films will demonstrate this, even if they deal with social or medical aspects of illness. Robin Curtis from the University of Freiburg is our first keynote speaker. Her topic is first-person documentary and essay films about dementia. For instance, Deborah Hoffman's Complaints of a Dutiful Daughter from 1994 or Ellen Berliner's First Cousin Once Removed from 2012. Films that deal with the loss of identity and subjectivity in the course of the disease.
In the aftermath of psychiatry reform efforts, the trend of positive psychology was on the rise as of the late 1980s. The aim was to relieve persons with mental illness of their passive status as people in need of help. This status is held ever since the days of Sigmund Freud. It is no longer about giving patients their diagnosis, rather therapists support individuals with finding and defining it by themselves. Rita Sharon or Arthur Frank developed narratological approaches to make one's own biography and pathography manageable.
Positive psychology is also the result of a change in society's perception of both mental illness and physical disability. Meanwhile, even the American Sesame Street played a pioneering role in inclusion. At the time, children with trisomy 21 were already among the show's guests. Also, the first film and arts festivals related to the subject were founded during this time. First in Toronto, the Rendezvous with Madness in 1995. In the following decades, similar festivals emerged around the world, in the USA, Europe, Southeast Asia, and Australia. The Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival is one of the largest of its kind, with over 300 events across film, music, theatre, poetry, and visual arts. Richard Warden is the former curator of the festival. On Friday, he will talk about his work and will present positions of contemporary documentary filmmaking, including by media artist Theresa Momin-Ip, whom we are happy to welcome as a guest.
Our second keynote speaker is Michel Aron from Warwick University. Aron researches and teaches in the field of medical humanities and is also the director of the Screening Human Rights Festival. In the context of her work, she has made films with hospice residents. From this, she draws conclusions for an ethics of filmmaking.
The medical humanities are a rather young field of research. They shed light on the interconnection between medicine, nursing, and the humanities and cultural studies. The research field in German-speaking countries is increasingly present. For example, through the German Network for Narrative Medicine at the University of Mainz or at the ETH Zurich. Susanne Michel holds the first professorship for medical humanities at the Charité in Berlin. The so-called visual medical humanities offer a methodological toolkit to further describe the relation between medical and picture and cultural conceptions. This is a mutual relationship. Films can have an impact on our conception of mental illness, but mental illness also challenges the film work, for example, cinema's conventional understanding of temporality and visibility. Mental illness defies representation. Films are therefore faced with a fundamental problem for which creative solutions must be found.
It is not only since Susan Sontag that the cultural scientific consideration of organic diseases is also related to the subject of impermanence. Mental illness, on the contrary, reverses the topos of finitude. Mental suffering appears to go on forever. Following this, we can see a different relation to the cinematic modes. Temporality, space, and also the body are called into question again. And this in one's inner experience as well as on the screen. Hence, it is not just the mind that can be seen as the central place where mental illness occurs and develops its effectiveness, but also the cinematic screen. Our third keynote speaker is W.J.T. Mitchell. His talk takes a tour of Western film history and proposes to look at the world through madness.
Mitchell formulates a question fundamental to film studies. Quote, "Since madness has always been subject to theatrical and spectacular display," he refers to the sacred ritual or the secular drama, "what does cinema bring to it that is new or unique to the medium?" End of quote. The fundamental question then is a Janus-faced one. What do we learn about illness from films, and what do we learn about the film system viewed through the lens of illness?
Therefore, films can also use mental ill-being to reflect on themselves. These are reflections on the cinematic apparatus or gaze structures. Exemplary are the Polaroid photos in Christopher Nolan's amnesia thriller Memento from 2000, or Chantal Akerman's A Couch in New York from 1993. In it, it is humorously explained what a projection is, as a psychological but also cinematic term.
Other films emphasize the medium itself or the act of seeing. The medium becomes the starting point of their stories about madness. Goodnight Mommy by Veronika Franz and Severin Fiala from 2014 deals with the paranoia of twin brothers of a distant and surgically masked mother. Other examples are Le Secret de la Chambre Noire, English title Daguerreotype by Kiyoshi Kurosawa from 2016, or Robert Altman's Images, 1967. In these films, the protagonists go insane over the inseparability of photographic and imaginary realities.
The conference structure brings together the contributions thematically according to current research fields. The first panel on Wednesday morning is about aesthetic conceptions of illness in film. They situate ill-being between cinematography and cinepathography. Cinepathographies question images and concepts of illness in terms of their epistemological interest in aesthetic knowledge. They apply their investigations of illness to their understanding of film and cinema. At the same time, they explore the specific mediality of film. The panel contrasts concepts of film theory and psychology. On the basis of film animation technology by Markus Kügle, on the basis of theories of auteur cinema by Lars Novak, on the basis of unclear boundaries to somatic syndromes by Daniel Eschkötter, and on the complex storytelling by Melanie Kreitler.
On the next day, the program continues with medical encounters, the relationship between patients and medical staff. These relationships are not only at the center of the cure of mental illness, but also central for their study. The setting of these encounters is of interest for medicine as well as for the humanities and cultural studies. How are the media inscribed into these settings, and what analogies are there to the relationship between film and the audience? Britta Hartmann and Janine Tschechel analyze autobiographical filmmaking as a form of self-therapy, and Silke Hilgers is highlighting its health-promoting potential. Christian Bonnat and Joël Danet focus on these encounters in an historical perspective, analyzing films by Eric Duvivier.
The last day opens with the panel Figuring Illness. As figurations of an aesthetic dispositif, Georges Didier Huberman describes the settings in which the alleged hysterics and so-called convulsionnaires were photographically fixed in the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. Figurations describe how illness is represented and reproduced through medical mechanisms. Cinematic figurations determine the complexity and historical, cultural, and aesthetic depth of these images. The panel brings together various close readings in this context. The figurative level is central in Sabrina Gärtner's analysis of Jessica Hausner's Little Joe. The level of film production plays a role in Insa Hertel's talk. She investigates impotent promises of salvation in film and the production business. Petra Anders analyzes representation in the context of disability studies. And last but not least, Natasha Pivek will deal with the feminist perspective, examining the stereotype of the crazy cat lady in different narrative formats.
Finally, we would like to thank all of our speakers and guests, as well as the team of the University of Bremen and City 46, for their engagement to make this conference possible.
Special thanks go to Kira Reichel and Paula Hoffmann for your tireless, unimaginable, and motivated coordination of the conference, and this over 2 years and 1 pandemic. Kira was crucial in the initial planning phase, and in light of the corona crisis, you had to cancel and pull out of your work. Paula, meanwhile, was faced with the difficult situation of transforming a finished concept into a digital conference. You managed in a very short time to find technical solutions for this with unthinkable prudence and to mediate between many different construction sites, all just from your computer without having met the entire team for once. You both did your work independently with a lot of heart, sweat, and blood, and with bravura, and you were indispensable for the planning and realization of this conference. It is a pity that you now will miss a warm applause that would have been given to you in the cinema, but we, especially I, are extremely grateful for your work.
For now, we wish all our guests and viewers a good time at the conference and a lively and inspiring exchange.